everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and welcome to night 3 of the 2021 Summer Mini Skein mini-series. Tonight we are going to do a single pan technique to create a fade intentionally by applying dry powder asymmetrically in the pan to get the fade set that we want. I am really excited to go revisit one of my favorite color combinations, but what are we waiting for? Let's go talk more about the project. We are going to start this project with 3 different yarn bases. We have Wool to Dye For's Platinum DK, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. We have That Yak, which is a fingering weight yarn, and 70% superwash merino, 20% yak, and 10% nylon. And then finally, the Donigal DK, which is 85% superwash merino and 15% naps. Right now we have 300 grams of yarn here in the pan, but I actually want to rearrange how we have this laid out because we are going to be trying to do sort of a one pan fade set here. And so since we have 3 different bases, it makes sense to have there be some spread between these colors, because if I had them twisted right next to each other, you could still try to do a one pan fade set, but this is giving us more length to work with as we try to create some distinct areas of color. And since we have a little bit more space, I'm gonna grab 5 more. These are all 20-gram mini skeins. 5 more of the Platinum DK minis and sort of just arrange them here in the pan. Now, I don't know yet if I will be flipping the yarn in the process or not. I really like dyeing these mini skeins as they are twisted because that adds a little bit resist and a little more just sort of variation and surprise about where the different colors end up. But so we might flip and add color to the other side, or we might not. We'll see how things go. But I do need to pre-soak our yarn because everything is dry right now. And right here I have 8 cups of tap water with 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. I may end up wanting to add more liquid, but given that everything is dry, this felt like a reasonable place to start. And I will give this probably at least 30 minutes, if not longer, amount of time for this yarn to soak up the liquid. And it might take a little bit of time, yeah, but I feel like the result is going to be that we'll have plenty of liquid in here, but we will have yarn that is at or slightly above the surface of the water, which right now it's floating a bit just because there is plenty of liquid, but I will come and press every so often. You can see the air coming out, which means that water is going in. And oh, I am so excited to play with this. But now let's go think about the colors we're going to use. The 3 primary colors, even though they're not primary colors, but the 3 main colors I want to use today are Tangelo, Deep Magenta, and Teal Green from Dharma Acid Dyes. And I have played with this color combination in self-striping yarn and even using them as speckles all over on one skein of yarn, and I've been really, really happy with the results in both of those. And so my hope is to create something fun, but a little bit more than just like teal and then a mix of teal and pink and then a mix and then just pink and then a mix of pink and Tangelo and then just Tangelo. I think that kind of structure is overall how it'll go, but maybe the teal will go a little bit further down. We'll see how this ends up in the pan. I'm thinking of going for larger splotches of color, sort of like what I did for Halloween, but planning out these splotches so that way there's more teal splotches down at one end and more orange or of the Tangelo down at the other. Now, I also pulled some dark navy. I am not sure if or how I'm going to use this color. I am going to see how it is feeling. But there's a chance that after I layer on these three main colors, I might decide with the navy to go and fill in some of those gaps or to just add a little bit of speckling. So I am not sure if or how I might be using this color, but I have it available as an option for me. And so for that, I'm excited. The yarn has pre-soaked, and there isn't a ton of extra water in here. Most of the water is very much just in the yarn. And I think I want to start with a cool application approach. This is something that I have been really into lately, and sort of takes a little bit of time pressure off, because when I add the dye, it gives a little more time for me to help it dissolve and move around, where things, if it were hot, would start striking and also dissolving because of the heat a little bit faster. So I think I'm gonna go get suited up so we can get started, but I will be wearing a rubber respirator with P100 filters, safety glasses, and gloves while I am dyeing the yarn today. I also do have a skein of Knit Picks Stroll fingering weight yarn that I pre-soaked in some water with vinegar. This is a 75/25 superwash merino nylon yarn, and I might be using it as a yarn moth to wipe excess dye off of my gloves. But since we're cool, I might do some of that here, very like finger painting type style. But I imagine when I lift my gloves, there'll still be something to wipe off. And so I like using a skein of yarn as a mop to do that. Let's start in the middle with the deep magenta, because maybe that'll help me. So 1, 2, 3, this is our middle. And I'm gonna go and add this yarn very sort of heavily splotchy here, and we are going to move through that. And so a little bit there. Yeah, I guess that's reasonable for the first sort of go in, and then I'm here sort of dissolving this dye and moving it through. And we've got some speckles, so some that I'm not pushing through the yarn, but some places where I definitely am. Yeah, and it's gone beyond. I'm very much making this up as I go along, but I do have a little bit of color left. So that I'm going to go ahead and rinse here, and then I will rinse and dry my gloves before going into our next color. Right, I'm going to focus on our teal green next, going heaviest down here. And so it's funny, there was like a thing where I was like, okay, I'm not gonna do X, and then I kind of basically just did, that's what I did. So we will see, but there's definitely, I'm adding little amounts of this color here, because I think that that's how I want to play this. And the fun thing about this is that I'm going about this sort of very much as I go, and just thinking where I want this to end up. And I like it. I like that those little hints going to all the way down there. And because I'm curious, I'm going to wipe my glove off first before I lift it, but I'm curious how far the color is going through. That did certainly move things a bit. because I'm debating how I'll want to proceed with the other side. But since it's twisted, I can then be a little bit different onto the other side too, and that is going to be fun. All right. Finally, we've got our Tangelo, which is a very sort of pinky orange color. It's not that orange. Not as orange as, say, Saffron Spice or some other colors. So it's funny, like, going into this when I'm like, okay, this is how I'm going to do it. But then I feel just some differences. And I just wanted to add a little bit of that color in there. So I want patches of color, but I also don't mind if we have some speckles. And so I think that I might focus a little more on getting some speckles when I flip it. But I'm happy to have some more solid, variegated sections throughout. There's still a lot of white going on in here. But so far I am really, really excited with where it's going. So I think the few notes to myself that I want to do, I want a little bit more pink right there. I want a little bit more pink there. I think I want like a tiny amount of pink down there. I'm just adding some that's going to be as speckles. Cool. Oh, you can touch that down. All right, and now I'm coming in with some navy, and I'm just going to add, not heavy at all, but just a little bit of some speckles on some of these white areas and on top of some of the color, just for another form of some dimension. Now there is not very much water in this pan, and so because of that, these should not spread that far, but they might spread a little bit because of like not having heat yet. So I think that's where we are so far. I think my favorite section of this so far is like right in there. But I need to start heating this and then flipping it to add color to the other side. So there's not a lot of liquid in here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the heat on super low. And then we're going to add a little bit of water to the edges. Right here I have 2 cups of water with a tablespoon of white vinegar. And I am I'm attempting to go most of the edge as I can, but clearly there is some amount that's going on top of the yarn. I'm sort of letting that soak in. I have no idea how I'm going to flip some of this without with keeping this yarn as these like little like fun spirals. But ooh, this is fun. Like adding more liquid is actually like giving some really fun blends. Oof. Okay, so now I'm going to turn up the heat a bit higher. We've got a little more liquid should I need it. But I'm going to heat this until it starts getting a little bit steamy. And as for our mop, we're still pretty empty, but I definitely want to dye the other side. And I'm potentially going to attempt this again on another pan. So there's that. But once we get a bit steamy, I'll come back. It has been 5 minutes and I'm still seeing lots of dye. We may not need to flip. There's a chance that because we have this undissolved dye that we see, that might be going down into the other layers of our yarn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the rest of this liquid that we have, and we will heat this for 15 minutes and then come back and check in. It's actually only been 5 minutes and the water is starting to run clear in areas, but there's still rivers where it's not. So what I'm doing is just gently pressing because I have a feeling that the places where the dye hasn't all absorbed might be places where there's still just some dye that hasn't dissolved. And so I figured that we would just give it a little bit of a nudge. A little bit of a nudge. And let's see. But yeah, the Tangelo has mostly absorbed. There's a little bit over there. Yeah, so I think maybe that'll help. I'm going to reduce the heat to low and we'll finish. I guess there's now only 8 minutes left, but we'll wait those 8 minutes and then come back and think about our yarn more. All right, let's see. It's clear. I see a hint of some teal. Okay, things are looking pretty clear. I mean, there's probably some hints of color like we see there, but I think I want to start trying to flip and then we can evaluate the other side. Okay, so let's start here. That looks like we've got some good color, but of course on the yak it is the hardest to see, and so we are going to have, just from the twist, there will be some light patches, but we'll want to pay attention. We might add some more color to these ends because it seems, yeah, I'm not feeling, oh dear, I'm not feeling the need to add a lot more color. Oh, funny, that one was laid out in the other direction. But moving it does expose certainly some of the areas where there was less color. And so again, I don't feel a need to add a ton. We might, and again, we might just speckle on the color more. And since again it's twisted, it'll sort of all move through. But yes, there is variable amounts. There will likely be some white, well, some white, because some of the yarn isn't white, but there will likely be some bare patches in here. And now let's flip. Start down here. These ones are definitely more crowded and have a different sort of metric overall from the rest. This is fun. I wonder, like, about setting something up with all the minis sort of twisted into little circles like this versus having them laid out like that. That would be a really fun way to do something watercolory at some point. But I'm gonna go put on my respirator, safety glasses, and gloves, and then we'll go ahead and add a little bit more color to these minis. I speckled our teal, deep magenta, and Tangelo sort of over regions where they were previously, keeping up the same patterns. Maybe bringing some teal further down or some orange further down, but basically following the pattern that I had set. The main thing that I wanted to do was make sure I have a light touch. I wanted to break up some of the bare patches, not eliminate them. So I focused more on speckling versus speckling and then pressing the dye into the yarn. So technique-wise, it's slightly different than what we did on the other side, but still very fun. And right now, the pan is hot. I am really excited to bring some more speckling in here. It's hard to know in some places how much this really might show up and how when we untwist things, this will interplay with some presumably still bare patches in here from when we open it up, but also some more solid areas from where we added the dye on that first round. So I'm just checking the liquid. We're likely also to have some spread. I'm not going to add any liquid yet. The heat is on the lowest setting. There is a tiny amount of steam. I am not going to cover the pan, but I mean, I seemed to add like a lot of teal. I'm a little nervous about this line here that I didn't add enough pink. I'll have to go look and see what it looked like before the flip. I'm a little nervous that it's going to feel abrupt, but otherwise I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to wait about 10 minutes and then we'll add more water. I went back and looked, and there's two things I want. The first is add just a little more pink, and it's really hard to see on the yak, but add a little bit more pink to it to sort of intensify it a little bit. And I know we're going to have some purple feeling areas, and that is okay with me. But I think pumping up that volume will help. It helps my eyeball right now, even though there were some good pink patches on it before. And the second thing I'm going to do is actually come in with a tiny bit more teal on some of this. So this one has some teal sort of connecting it, but I just wanted to help bring that together and help with the cohesion a bit. I mean, it could be hard for me to stop. I could keep adding and adding and adding and adding, but I know that when I untwist these, it's going to be really, really fun. And here's our yarn mop so far. I think I'm going to go ahead and steam set it right now because I think I'm done adding dye down below, so I may as well steam set it, but it's sort of beautiful and random. So I'll steam set this for 30 minutes and then let it cool, and we'll wash it at the end. We are going to come in with more liquid. Once again, I'm going to add, this time actually I'll add 2 tablespoons to 2 cups. So I've got 2 tablespoons of vinegar in 2 cups of plain water. And I'm adding it primarily to these edges, but it will flow down and around everything. But this is going to give us some more volume, so then I can turn up the heat a little bit and not worry about anything bad happening. And this is also going to cause some of the dyes to spread a little bit, which will also be fun. I am really, really excited. I know things look really dark right now, but things will feel a bit brighter, and especially on the yak, it'll be easier to see once it is dry. But nevertheless, I am going to let this go for, I think, another 15 minutes. Then we'll come back and check. Alrighty, it has been another 15 minutes and I am seeing some hints of color, but nothing bad. So what I'm going to do now is I have some leftover water that Presoaked, that had from the yarn mop Presoak actually, that had some water with vinegar, and I'm pouring it on top. So now we are in a full-on immersion situation. I'm going to turn up the heat until it starts getting a little bubbly. Then I'm going to turn off the heat and let everything cool completely. Here in, maybe not the whole time in the pan, but I'm going to let it cool a lot in the pan before we get ready to untwist some of these and wash them. The yarn has cooled completely and there is no dye left in the water, so now we can start opening up the skeins. Going in my presumed sets of 5, I gently squeezed out the water and unwrapped each of these twisted minis, and then put these little sets onto removable nylon zip ties so that way they could be kept together for washing. There's a chance I might swap around the sets from the 5 Platinum DK, the ones along the side versus the ones that were in the long row, but I wanted to keep the ones together that were in the pan slightly differently so that way I could look at them once they're dry and see what I thought about the overall technique. I set up 2 more pans using a combination of the titanium sock and a little bit more of that donigal DK. And I proceeded to add on the powder in a very similar way. The first time sort of touching it down to give us a little bit more solid, starting cool, but then starting to heat, adding more water. And then on the flip, I did more speckles to not blend the colors too much, but to give us some really nice variegated tones. We saw that when we opened these up, we did get some really beautiful variegation in the yarn, and I am so excited, even if I potentially went a little heavier with dye this time. Here is one of the pans that I dyed in the little bonus time lapse, and since this pan is all one base, you really can start to see the progression in the fade in here, which I think is so fun and beautiful. Certainly in doing this, you could use 100% of the skeins, and maybe you would swap the order around or maybe not, but you could do a large project using all of the yarn that is created in a project like this, and that would be absolutely beautiful. Ultimately, it's up to you. Now, if you did want to do, say, just a 100-gram fade in this kind of effect, I would probably either, that's not enough space, I would probably untwist the yarn and sort of lay it out flat, sort of like this, in little loops with low water, and then do the technique. The twisted skeins allow me to have good access to many different minis at the same time. So that's just another way that I would set this up if I was only going to do this on 100 grams for a project. But this is certainly enough to make a huge, gorgeous shawl. I just thought it would be fun to include one more little untwisting time lapse, both of the pan that I just showed, but also the other pan that I had that was 50% donigal DK and 50% platinum sock. Once again, I tried to keep the yarn that was in a circle separate from the yarn that was more flat, but with the donigal, I just grouped it together as a group of 10. And then once everything was untwisted, I went and washed all of this off camera. But let's go wash that first pan that I dyed on camera. Let's start washing some of this yarn. I'm gonna grab just the minis. We may as well start with all of them. I mean, the wash basin that I use for the videos is small, mainly because I just want to show if there's any issues. And so far, so good. I am really excited to see how this turns out. I just added a little bit of some clear dish soap, and I'm not seeing any bleeding, which is what we want to see. Now, I feel like on some of the next batches that I did of this technique, I maybe went a little heavier with dye, but I will only show the washing if I do see bleeding there. But this looks great. I'm going to rinse it a few more times, wash out all of that soap. Then we're going to put the yarn through the spin dryer and hang it up to dry. And I'm going to go ahead and wash. I have this yarn mop, and there's one other yarn mop so far. So I guess this was our first yarn mop right here. And here is our second yarn mop. They are very similar, but have some differences just because they were done at different times. I'm going to wash these off camera. But once everything is dry, we'll come back for some conclusions. The dry yarn is fun, full of life, and I mean, there is more bare color than I thought, but that came from that resist of our twisted stitches. And it was a really fun way to dye a lot of minis in one pan. But let's take a closer look between the two sets, one that was on the edges in those little circles and one that was distributed throughout the pan. I no longer know which one is which. So I wouldn't be able to sort of set them aside and make big conclusions about one versus the other. But ultimately, they are very, very similar in terms of the way the fades and the color progressions go. The one main difference is this set feels a little more saturated overall, and that one a little less saturated. So it's possible that either I went heavier on the edges or less heavy. But in terms of how these colors are distributed throughout, I feel like they're very, very similar. And so having the twisted mini skein curled up in a ball versus straight didn't make a huge difference. Looking at just one set, you can see how these colors transition with there being pink. Ooh, look at that little spot of pink over there on most of the skeins. Doing this on one pan leads to a little more randomness through it. For example, these tiny hints of pink that are on this green skein, I'm not sure if I necessarily would have reached that point. And there's not necessarily green going all the way to here on this particular one, but there might be on others. And I really, really enjoy this overall technique. Now, it would be harder to do this on, say, 5 full skeins all in one pan. And so that would require a little bit more restraint on my part and a lot more planning to be like, okay, yes, this is the general amount and proportion of colors I want in this pan. But you could do 3 skeins in one pan, I think, with this general effect, and sort of have 3 skeins and dye them in an asymmetric way in one pan, so that way you can get a fade. And that's certainly not the way big dyers who make big fade kits do it, but as an individual, this is a really fun way to play. I think this colorway looks okay on the donigal DK. It is not the best colorway to really highlight these donigal neps, but the little bits of black neps make it look like speckles. And then in some places where you have the lighter neps in the darker color, that looks really, really nice as well. So it's still beautiful, and that adds like another element of speckles to it. And I really, really like it. I think that this kind of highly variegated colorway is not something that you see on tweeds a lot. I think a lot of times they tend to be more semi-solid and tonal. And I still really, really like it. And I have to say, I'm having a lot of fun playing with so many different yarn bases for each of these colorways, because you can get a fun feeling of how things just look so different depending on the yarn you pick. These bright colors are showing up so nicely on the yak. There is less contrast overall because of that deeper brown or grayish brown that we started with in the bear color, but I still think that it's really, really beautiful. Maybe I had it overexposed before. It is moodier and feels, well, there's less contrast, as I said, but I'm glad that these 3 hues really do pop. We still have these jewel tones, and I would say of the 3, the orange feels a little bit, the Tangelo feels a little bit less orange. It's a little bit deeper. But as for the rest, maybe you could think that I just added more dye on. So I think that it's really, really fun. The first 4 sets we were looking at over on the left were all dyed in one pan. And those 3 bases were Platinum DK, Donigal DK, and then that yak sock. Here is some titanium sock that is from a different pan, and there are some differences, and I don't think it's because of that yarn base as much as it is because when you're doing something like this without a recipe and applying that dye randomly, there will be differences between different dye lots and different pans. I think I went a bit heavier in with the navy in here, and maybe there's a little bit of pink on all 5 skeins, but that's also okay and fun. And one of the fun things about this technique is it's very much feels like finger painting, and I am really happy with the results. Here on this bottom row, we have a set of, it's all the titanium sock that we did in one pan. In this big row of 15, these were our row, and then those were our little circles. So I'm gonna go divide this into 3 sets. I'd say things are, very, very similar, especially stepping this far back. There are absolutely differences between all of these fades, and if one person were gonna knit these all into a stockinette cowl, they would look different just because of where the different color transitions occur. But I am so excited that I tried to fit that 4th set in the pan. Here are the 12 sets that I dyed in this video today. 12 sets, 4 different yarn bases, 1 colorway, and from back here, they all look really, really similar, except for that yak. Because otherwise, like all of the bases, I think that the donigal DK was a little bit a hair darker than the white of, or the off-white of the titanium and platinum, but those ones do look more similar, especially standing back from this far. So why dye these kinds of colorways on mini skeins instead of using a sock blank or even a double-stranded sock blank? Because if you were to take one of these fade sets and use it to make 2 pairs of socks, there might be some differences between the 2 and where colors are placed. It depends on how consistent within one mini skein the colors come out. And if we had dyed this kind of fade on a sock blank, especially a double-stranded sock blank, and then you were going to go knit socks, they would absolutely be identical because of the nature of a sock blank. And when you have 2 strands of yarn next to one another, they're going to be matched after you dye it. Ultimately, I think that there are more yarn bases available in mini skeins than there are as sock blanks. So that's one aspect. But the other one is that in doing this technique, I have a little bit more control over where the different colors are placed and where those transitions happen. And then you can decide when working with them if you want to blend them together when you're switching from one skein to the other, or if you want to not. I mean, in this case, there probably wouldn't be a super crude line because the transition between these colors are fairly subtle. So I think that if you do mini skeins like this, something all in one pan that gives you something that's soft between them, you are able then to do this gradient on a larger project like a cowl, or on a smaller project like a cuff of a sock or something. So you could use a little bit of each of these minis or a lot, and you don't have to cut a sock blank in order to do that. So technique-wise, there are pluses and minuses. You don't have to unravel these like you do a blank, but if you're starting from any yarn, you do have to wind the minis, but I suppose you'd have to wind the blank anyway. So those are all things I guess you can consider. However, if you would like me to dye this colorway on a sock blank, let me know down in the comments. I just absolutely love this colorway, and I'm so excited to play with it more going forward. I almost forgot, we have yarn mops. All of these were used while we were dyeing the yarn, and we wiped, as I speckled or applied the dry powder to our pans, then I would wipe my glove off on these other skeins. And the navy makes way more of an impact here in both of them, primarily because even though I was just adding a tiny bit onto the yarn, there was still just as much on my fingers as if I had used any of the other colors. So anyway, these mops are really fun, and you should go check out the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop because the mops may be in the shop right now. And if they're no longer there, my shop is filled with hundreds of skeins of hand-dyed yarn featured in all of these videos. Well, what do you think? Should I do this similar technique and colorway on sock blanks? I actually think that there are multiple colorways from this summer mini skein mini series that would look amazing on blanks, and well, I have a feeling I will end up trying to replicate some of these color combinations on blanks, no matter what. But please let me know down in the comments below what you think. Stay tuned because there are more summer mini skein mini series videos. Every night this week at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, I will release a new video. You can find all of the SMSMS videos in a playlist that I will have linked down below. But please make sure you're subscribed to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel so that way you never miss a new video. In addition to this special series, I am still posting at least 2 new videos every single week at 8:30 a.m. on Tuesday and Friday mornings Eastern Time, and you don't want to miss any of it. And the Type Hot Weekly episodes this week also feature mini skeins to give more mini skein celebration. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.